It was supposed to be a regular evening. My wife, Laura, had reminded me twice that it was my sister Emily's birthday. "You didn't forget, did you?" she'd asked earlier that afternoon, her tone carrying the usual mix of amusement and exasperation. I hadn't, but it wasn't something I was particularly looking forward to either. Emily and I had always had a rocky relationship, one built more on obligation than warmth. By the time we arrived at her house, the driveway was packed with luxury cars. Laura adjusted her dress in the mirror, muttering something about feeling underdressed. I didn't think much of it. Emily always had a flair for over-the-top events. The music was loud, the kind that seemed designed to make your ears ring for hours afterward. As we approached the door, I noticed a polished sign by the entrance. It was neatly lettered, almost like something you'd see at a charity gala. "Welcome to Emily's extravaganza. Guests, check in here." Laura and I exchanged a look, her eyebrow raised in silent question. My unease grew as we stepped inside. The room was filled with people I didn't recognize, Emily's co-workers, clients, and socialites she seemed to collect like exotic pets. I scanned the room for familiar faces but came up empty. No parents, no cousins, not even the few mutual friends we had. Emily appeared out of nowhere, dressed in a sparkling gown that was more suited to an award ceremony than a birthday party. Her smile was wide, but there was something off about it, like she was trying too hard to keep it plastered on. "Peter. Laura. You made it." She clasped her hands together as if I were some unexpected celebrity who'd dropped by. "Of course," I said cautiously. "Happy birthday, Emily." "Thanks. But, Peter, can I talk to you for a second?" "Alone?" Laura shot me a questioning glance, but I nodded, letting Emily guide me toward a corner of the room where the music was slightly less deafening. "So," she began, clasping her hands in front of her. "There's a small situation." I narrowed my eyes. "What kind of situation?" She hesitated, glancing around before lowering her voice. "It's about tonight. You know, with the guest list being what it is and the catering costs, I thought it'd be fair if everyone contributed. Including you." "Fair?" I echoed, already feeling the beginnings of a headache. "What are you talking about?" Emily smiled, the kind of smile a salesperson gives before quoting a ridiculous price. "We're asking everyone for $2,000 as a contribution to the event. It's only fair, especially since you're family." For a moment, I stood there in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd just heard. Emily's words replayed in my mind like a broken record, $2,000, especially since you're family. "Wait," I said finally, crossing my arms. "You're telling me I have to pay to attend your birthday party? Is this some kind of joke?" Emily's smile wavered, but her tone remained maddeningly casual. "It's not like that, Peter. You know how these things go, venues, catering, entertainment, it all adds up. Besides," she added with a forced laugh, "you and Laura don't come to many of my events, so consider this your way of catching up." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This isn't a fundraiser, Emily. It's your birthday. And for the record, it's not that we don't come to your events, it's that we're rarely invited. You always make it clear your parties are for your other crowd." Her eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of annoyance breaking through her polished exterior. "That's not true," she said sharply. "And besides, this isn't just about me. Everyone's contributing tonight." "Everyone?" I glanced back at the glittering room full of strangers. "You mean all these people who probably don't even know who I am?" Her jaw tightened. "Look, Peter, I'm trying to keep things fair. If you can't contribute, maybe you and Laura could step out for tonight. No hard feelings." "Step out?" My voice rose despite my effort to keep calm. "Are you serious? You're asking me to leave your birthday because I won't pay $2,000. Emily's smile disappeared entirely. "I'm not asking, Peter. I'm telling. This isn't a charity dinner, it's my night. And if you can't respect the effort I've put into making it perfect, maybe it's better if you aren't here." At that moment, Laura walked over, concern written all over her face. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between us. "Your husband doesn't understand the concept of supporting family," Emily snapped before I could respond. "I'm simply asking for a contribution, and he's acting like I'm robbing him." Laura blinked, stunned. "A contribution? Emily, are you charging people to come to your birthday?" Emily sighed dramatically, as though explaining herself were a burden. "It's not charging. It's ensuring everyone chips in for the experience. It's not unreasonable." Laura turned to me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You're not actually considering this, are you?" "Of course not," I said firmly, glaring at Emily. "But apparently, if we don't pay, we're not welcome." Emily crossed her arms, her gaze icy. "I don't see why this is such a big deal. If you can't support me, Peter, maybe it's better if you leave. I won't have this drama ruining my night." I opened my mouth to reply, but Laura grabbed my arm. "Let's go," she said, her voice tight. "We don't need to do this here." I hesitated, torn between the urge to argue and the growing weight of humiliation pressing on my chest. Finally, I nodded and let her pull me toward the door. The eyes of Emily's polished guests followed us as we left, whispers rippling through the room like static. As we stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. "What the hell was that?" I said, turning to Laura. She shook her head, her own frustration evident. "I don't know, Peter. But something about this feels off, more than just Emily being her usual self. What's going on with her?" The drive home was tense and quiet. Laura stared out the window, her arms crossed, while I gripped the steering wheel, replaying the scene with Emily in my head. "What's wrong with her?" I muttered. "It's like she's forgotten what family even means." "Maybe it's more than that," Laura said, her voice measured. "You saw how over the top everything was. And who were those people?" I didn't recognize a single face. "Neither did I admitted, glancing at her. She said they were all contributing too. But who charges their family and friends for a birthday party?" Laura sighed, her gaze distant. "I don't know. But it feels calculated. Like she needed the money more than she needed us there." The thought unsettled me. Emily wasn't exactly humble, but she'd always had a knack for keeping her financial life pristine, or at least appearing that way. From designer clothes to luxury vacations, she never let the facade slip. Could it be that her flashy lifestyle had finally caught up with her? The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I debated calling Emily, but our argument replayed in my mind, her cutting tone and dismissive words still stinging. Instead, I texted our mother to see if she knew anything. "Hey Mom, have you talked to Emily recently? We had a weird run-in last night, and I wanted to check in." Her response came quickly. "Not really. She's been distant lately. Everything okay?" I stared at the screen, my unease growing. Distant wasn't a word Emily usually allowed anyone to associate with her. She thrived on attention, always at the center of family gatherings, even when she was driving us crazy. Something wasn't adding up. Laura had her own theories. Maybe she's in trouble. Financially, I mean, she suggested that evening as we sat in the living room. Emily? In trouble? I laughed humorlessly. She'd rather sell her car than admit she can't pay her bills. Laura didn't laugh. That's exactly why she'd throw a party like that. To make it seem like everything's fine while quietly asking for money. I considered this, the pieces clicking into place in a way that made me uncomfortable. If that's true, why not just ask for help? Why disguise it as a party fee? Pride, Laura said simply. And maybe, shame. The word hit me harder than I expected. Emily wasn't perfect, but she'd always been the sister I looked up to as a kid, the one who seemed invincible. The idea of her struggling with something she couldn't handle was almost unthinkable. Still, the memory of her smug expression from the night before stayed with me. If she really was in trouble, why push me and Laura away instead of pulling us closer? The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Emily's behavior than met the eye. The whole situation nagged at me, like a puzzle with missing pieces. I decided to visit my mother, hoping she might have some insight. Mom greeted me at the door with a hug, her brow furrowed in concern. "You said something was off with Emily," she asked as we sat in the cozy kitchen, a pot of coffee steaming between us. "She tried to charge me $2,000 to come to her birthday party," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. Mom's jaw dropped. "She what?" "She said it was to help cover costs. But I don't understand how throwing a party could cost that much. It wasn't at a venue, it was her house." Mom pursed her lips, her expression a mixture of shock and suspicion. "I had no idea she was doing anything like that. She never mentioned money troubles, but she's been keeping her distance lately." "That's what Laura and I thought, too," I admitted. "But Emily's never been the type to admit when she needs help. Do you think she's in some kind of financial mess?" Mom hesitated, her hands tightening around her coffee mug. "You remember how she started that new investment last year? Some business with those real estate projects?" I nodded vaguely, recalling a conversation about it during a family dinner. Emily had been bragging about how it was a can't-miss opportunity. "Well," Mom continued carefully, "I overheard her talking to your Uncle Alan at Thanksgiving. She didn't realize I was nearby. She said something about losing a lot more than expected." A pit formed in my stomach. "Did she say how much?" "No, but it sounded serious. Alan asked if she needed help, and she brushed him off." "Typical Emily," Mom added with a sigh. I leaned back in my chair, piecing it together. If Emily had sunk a fortune into a bad investment, it would explain a lot: her over-the-top party, the demand for money, and the crowd of strangers who seemed more like potential clients than friends. Mom reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "You know how she is, Peter. She hides things when she feels like she's losing control. She'd rather pretend everything's fine than admit she needs help." I nodded, her words confirming what I already suspected. "But if that's true, why go after her own family like this? She knows I can't just hand over $2,000. Mom shook her head, a sad look in her eyes. "Maybe she thought you wouldn't question it. Or maybe she's so desperate she's not thinking straight." I left her house more conflicted than ever. On one hand, I was angry at Emily for putting me in such an awkward position. But on the other, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy. If she was in over her head, how bad had it gotten for her to act this way? When I got home, Laura was waiting for me on the couch. "What did your mom say?" she asked. I hesitated, not sure how to put it into words. "She thinks Emily might have lost a lot of money in some investment last year. Maybe the party was her way of, I don't know, covering her tracks." Laura frowned. "So instead of asking for help, she throws a party and makes her family feel like outsiders? That's not just desperate, it's selfish." "I know," I said, sitting beside her. "But if she's really in trouble, maybe we should try to find out how bad it is before we write her off completely." Laura sighed, crossing her arms. "I get that, Peter, but she's not making it easy to feel sorry for her." I couldn't argue with that. Emily had always been a master of creating walls, even when she needed a lifeline. I decided the only way to get real answers was to confront Emily directly. The next evening, I called her. She didn't pick up, so I left a message. "Emily, it's Peter. We need to talk. I'm coming by tomorrow." When she didn't call back, I took it as permission, though I doubted she'd see it that way. Laura offered to come with me, but I told her it was better if I went alone. This was between me and Emily, and I didn't want it turning into a group intervention. The next afternoon, I drove to her house. The music and laughter from her party had been replaced by an eerie quiet. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. When she opened the door, her expression immediately shifted from surprise to irritation. "Peter, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, stepping inside before she could shut the door in my face. Emily sighed, folding her arms. "I thought I made everything clear the other night." "You made it clear you're charging people to come to your birthday," I shot back. "What you didn't make clear is why." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't owe you an explanation." "Maybe not," I admitted, "but you owe me the truth. You're my sister, Emily. If something's wrong, you can just say it. You don't have to play these games." She hesitated, glancing toward the living room where remnants of the party still lingered, empty glasses, stray napkins, and a wilting bouquet on the table. For a moment, I thought she might brush me off again. Then she sighed heavily and gestured toward the couch. "Fine. You want the truth. Sit down." I sat, watching as she paced the room, her sequin party persona now replaced with someone who looked worn out and frazzled. "Last year," she began, her voice unsteady, "I got involved in this real estate investment. It was supposed to be a guaranteed thing, huge returns, minimal risk. I sunk almost everything I had into it." I stayed silent, letting her continue. "At first, it looked like it was working. I got some payouts, nothing huge, but enough to keep me convinced. Then the whole thing fell apart. The developers went bankrupt, and the project stalled. I lost everything." The words hung in the air like smoke. I leaned forward, trying to process what she'd just admitted. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because I couldn't," she snapped. "I've spent my whole life building an image, Peter. If people knew I'd failed, if Mom or Uncle Alan knew, I'd be a joke. So, I tried to fix it on my own. By throwing a party and charging $2,000 for admission?" I asked, incredulous. "It wasn't just about the money," she said defensively. "It was about showing people I'm still in control. That I'm still Emily." I rubbed my temples, the weight of her confession settling in. "Emily, this doesn't make sense. You're pushing away the people who would actually help you, family, and surrounding yourself with strangers who don't care about you." Her jaw tightened. "I don't need help, Peter. I just need time to get back on track." "Time?" I repeated, standing up. "Time isn't going to fix this if you keep pretending everything's fine. You're in over your head, and it's okay to admit that. But you can't keep shutting people out and expecting us to play along." She looked at me, her expression a mix of defiance and something softer, something vulnerable. "I'm not shutting people out," she said quietly. "I'm just scared." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. For all her bravado, Emily was just as lost as I'd suspected. Emily's words hung in the air, "I'm just scared." For a moment, I felt a twinge of sympathy, but it was quickly tempered by frustration. She might be scared, but that didn't excuse the way she treated me, or the rest of the family. "You're scared," I said slowly. "Okay, I get that. But why didn't you come to us? Why didn't you ask for help instead of, whatever this is?" Emily sat down on the edge of the couch, her shoulders slumped. "Because asking for help would mean admitting I screwed up," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I couldn't bear the thought of everyone seeing me as a failure." I sat across from her, the anger in my chest now dulled by something closer to pity. "Emily, nobody would see you as a failure. They'd see you as human." She laughed bitterly. "You don't know that. Do you know how many times I've heard Mom compare us? How she gushes about how steady your life is, how you're the reliable one. I've built my whole life trying to prove I could do more, be more, and now it's all falling apart." Her words caught me off guard. Growing up, I'd always thought Emily thrived on being the golden child, the one who outshone everyone else. It had never occurred to me that she felt trapped by the same pedestal she'd worked so hard to climb. "Emily," I said carefully, "no one expects you to be perfect. If you're in trouble, the people who care about you, our family, would rather help than see you go through this alone." She looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Do you really think that?" "Because right now, I feel like I've already lost everyone." "Not yet," I said. "But you have to take the first step. You can't keep pretending everything's fine. You need to be honest, about what's going on, about what you need." She didn't respond right away, and I could tell she was wrestling with the weight of what I'd said. Finally, she nodded, a small, reluctant gesture. "I'll think about it." "That's a start," I said, standing up. "But you need to do more than think about it. Call Mom. Talk to Uncle Alan. If they hear it from you, they'll want to help." Emily gave me a faint smile. "You're not going to let me off easy, are you?" "Not a chance," I said, trying to inject some lightness into my tone. As I left her house, I felt a cautious sense of hope. Emily had opened up, at least a little, and it was a step in the right direction. But I also knew that her pride and fear of judgment could still sabotage any progress. When I got home, Laura was waiting for me, her arms crossed. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "She admitted she's in trouble," I said. "She lost a lot of money in some bad investment, and now she's trying to keep up appearances." Laura's brow furrowed. "Did she say how much she lost?" "No," I admitted. "But it sounds serious. Serious enough that she's been pushing everyone away instead of asking for help. And you think she'll actually listen to you?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But at least she knows I'm not going to let her go through this alone." Laura nodded, though her expression remained guarded. "I hope you're right. But don't let her take advantage of you, Peter. She has to want to fix this herself." "I know," I said, though deep down, I wondered if Emily was ready to face the consequences of her actions, or if she'd keep trying to outrun them. A week passed with no word from Emily. I wasn't entirely surprised, she'd always had a tendency to retreat when things got tough. But the silence gnawed at me. I didn't want to push her too hard, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that she might sink further if left alone. Then, late one evening, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. "I called Mom. She wants to talk tomorrow." "Thanks. I guess." It wasn't much, but it was something. Laura, reading over my shoulder, said, "That's a good sign, right?" "I hope so," I replied. The next day, I decided to stop by Mom's house, knowing she and Emily were supposed to meet that afternoon. When I arrived, Emily's car was already in the driveway. I hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. Mom answered, her expression a mixture of relief and worry. "Peter, come in. Emily's here." Inside, Emily was sitting on the couch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked up when I entered, her expression guarded. "I didn't invite you," she said flatly. "I know," I replied, taking a seat across from her. "But I wanted to be here for this. Mom deserves the whole picture, doesn't she?" Mom sat down beside me, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "Emily's told me a little," she said carefully. "But I'd like to understand more." Emily sighed, her posture softening just a bit. "I told her about the investment," she said. "And how I lost the money." "That's a start," I said. Emily shot me a sharp look but didn't argue. "What I didn't say," she continued, her voice quieter, "is how bad it really is. I didn't just lose my savings. I borrowed money. From people I shouldn't have." Mom gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Emily." "I thought I could pay it back," Emily said quickly. "I thought I'd make it back with the investment, but now I'm in over my head. They're threatening me, Mom. I didn't know what else to do. The room fell into stunned silence. I had suspected things were bad, but hearing it laid out like this was a gut punch. How much do you owe? I asked finally. Emily hesitated, then muttered, 40,000. Mom let out a small cry, and I felt my stomach drop. Emily, that's not something you can just sweep under the rug. I know that, she snapped, her eyes flashing. But what do you want me to do? I'm already selling my car and trying to figure out how to handle it. That's why I threw the party, hoping I could raise something to hold them off for a while. Mom shook her head, tears in her eyes. Why didn't you come to me sooner? We could have helped you before it got to this point. Because I was ashamed. Emily shouted, her voice breaking. Because I didn't want you to see me like this. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. Emily, no one here thinks less of you for struggling. But you can't keep doing this alone. You need help, real help. Have you talked to a financial advisor? Or the police if you're being threatened? Emily looked down, tears slipping down her cheeks. No. I don't even know where to start. Mom reached out, taking her hand. You start here, with us. We'll figure this out together. I nodded, though my mind was already racing. $40,000 was a massive hole to climb out of, but it wasn't impossible, especially if Emily was willing to be honest and accept help. This isn't going to be easy, I said. But you're not doing it alone anymore. For the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of relief in Emily's eyes. The days that followed were intense but productive. Emily, Mom, and I worked together to untangle the mess she'd created. We started by listing her debts, every loan, credit card, and favor owed. Emily had been hesitant at first, but the relief on her face as we tackled each step was undeniable. We reached out to a financial advisor Mom recommended, who helped Emily consolidate her debts and negotiate with her creditors. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a plan, and for the first time, Emily seemed hopeful. Even so, the tension in the family hadn't completely faded. Laura was supportive but wary, reminding me not to let Emily's problems drag us down too. Help her, but don't let her pull you in, she said one night. I knew she was right, but seeing Emily vulnerable and trying gave me a reason to believe things could improve. As Emily worked to regain control, she also started repairing her relationships, apologizing to Mom, reaching out to Uncle Alan, and even writing a note to Laura. It was far from perfect, but it was a start. 3 months later, Emily had transformed in ways I never thought possible. The sister who once lived for appearances and avoided accountability was now unflinchingly confronting her problems. She'd sold her car, downsized her expenses, and stuck to the financial plan we'd created. Though the debt still loomed, she'd made enough progress to keep her creditors at bay. One evening, Mom invited everyone over for dinner. Emily arrived early to help cook, a gesture that surprised us all. As we gathered around the table, there was a warmth in the room that had been missing for years. Emily had a lightness about her, as though she'd shed the weight of pretending to have it all together. After dinner, as we lingered over coffee, Emily cleared her throat. I want to say something, she began, her voice steady but emotional. We all turned to her, the room falling silent. I know I've made a lot of mistakes, she said, looking around the table. And I know I hurt you, especially you, Peter. I used to think that asking for help was a sign of weakness, but now I realize it's the only way to grow. You've all been so much more patient with me than I deserve, and I just want to say thank you. The sincerity in her voice was disarming. I felt a lump rise in my throat but managed a small smile. You've come a long way, Emily, I said. I'm proud of you. Mom wiped her eyes, clearly moved. Laura, too, offered Emily a kind nod. But then Emily surprised us with something none of us had expected. There's one more thing, she said, glancing nervously at me. Peter, I owe you an explanation for what happened at the party. I sat up straighter, my curiosity piqued. I didn't just throw the party for money, she admitted. I was also trying to impress someone. One of the guests was a potential investor I'd been trying to convince to back a new project. I thought if they saw me hosting a big, glamorous event, they'd take me seriously. But it didn't work. They left halfway through the night, and I was left with nothing but regret. The room was silent as we processed her words. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" I asked gently. Emily shrugged, a self-deprecating smile tugging at her lips. I guess I wasn't ready to admit how desperate I'd become. It felt easier to hide behind the idea of a party than to face the reality of what I was doing. Mom reached over and placed a hand on Emily's. "You don't have to prove anything to us. We love you for who you are, not for what you can achieve." Emily nodded, her eyes glassy. "I know that now. But it's taken me a long time to believe it." As the night wore on, the tension that had defined our relationship for so long seemed to dissipate. Emily wasn't perfect, and there was still work to do, but for the first time in years, she felt like my sister again, the person I'd grown up with, not the polished image she tried so hard to maintain. When Laura and I left that night, I felt a strange sense of closure. The road to forgiveness hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Emily's struggles had forced all of us to reevaluate what family meant, and in the end, it had brought us closer together. As we drove home, Laura reached over and squeezed my hand. "I think she's going to be okay," she said softly. I smiled, a weight lifting from my chest. "Yeah," I replied. "I think we all are."